Hello, beautiful visionaries. I'm your host, Lorna Liana, and we're going to be exploring the fascinating intersection between ancestral plant spirit healing and psychedelic medicine. Today, I'm really excited to bring to you Kumiko Hayashi and Jimmy Piaguaje. Kumiko is a meta shaman and film director who has been working with plant medicines and indigenous tribes for over 7 years. And she's documented her experience with indigenous communities from the Andes to the Amazon. She tells that story in her film, The Roots Awaken. Jimmy is a young indigenous leader of the Siakupai Nation. He is a communicator for the organization Alianza Sebo, which is a partner of Amazon Frontlines. He is currently producing his feature-length fiction film, Wahokone, about his grandparents confronting the first Spanish invaders. Today, we're going to explore the concept of plant medicines as a force for indigenous sovereignty. We're going to explore what it takes to be able to create a bridge between the Western world and indigenous communities for those of us who are inspired and transformed by sacred plant medicines of the Americas. And we're also going to explore how we can be true allies to the indigenous movement. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Okay, so Kumiko, how did you get started in this journey of working in indigenous filmmaking as somebody who also has spent a considerable amount of time living with indigenous communities?
Yeah, sure. So, back in 2014, I actually left the States and came to Ecuador, on a one-way ticket. And without any sort of plan or production or script, I basically, came with this sort of open heart and trust. And then soon after was actually invited to a gathering for world peace on the middle of the world on the equator. And there were indigenous leaders from around the world, particularly from Via Yala, from North to South America. A lot of, shamans, healers, wisdom keepers that basically came together to pray for the next generation of youth that would be upholding, this indigenous wisdom. And so it was actually the first time I had ever really been in a sort of unification of so many ceremonies. And I had my camera, and I always, had this, drive towards filmmaking and, observing, what was going on there. I just had my camera. And then actually on the last day of the ceremony, there was a big fire where, everybody was gathered. And sometimes with indigenous ceremony, there's always this, kind of hesitation around filmmaking because it's sacred, and there's certain moments where, they tend not to want filming. So it's a very sensitive, area. A lot of us maybe have come across that. Do you take a picture or do I not? So in that moment, I was like, okay, I'm just going to kind of stand back and let this happen. But actually the elders called me and they said, please come to the center of the fire. We want you to film. This is very important. So, I did what I was instructed to do. And then I basically got this sort of download that I needed to live with the indigenous people to actually understand the realities that they were facing. There's just so much on the news and so much out there, but I needed to get this firsthand experience. So, I thought it could be a couple weeks, a couple months. And from that gathering, I basically met some different contacts of, indigenous people from the Amazon. One was actually from Sarayaku in the southern area of Ecuador. And I was invited to, just come and see what was going on and just kind of be a part of the family. So from there, I just filmed with no agenda, and it ended up turning into, actually 7 years, what I thought could be a couple weeks. So I've been filming for over 7 years now. And, over time, I was able to get a story from all of these experiences. But more than anything, it started from just observation and friendship without sort of like an agenda. And that's really how my journey started.
That is amazing. And 7 years is quite an amount of time. How does, what is it like? I mean, do you just, you get invited and then you're staying with a family, I would imagine, right? There aren't hotels, are there? Like you're invited as a guest and living in somebody's home. Is that correct?
Right, right. No hotels. So it's like, hey, just come on over, and not knowing exactly what your bed's going to look like, or, you know, what the situation's going to be, just kind of, you know, coming as a friend, as a guest.
Uh-huh. And then how do you just feel comfortable staying that long? You know, because I mean, I think like, you know, it's my experience in Brazil is very similar as well, where it was a lot of invitations and we're sitting, you know, we're staying in people's homes, and then we're getting invited to another village, and then we're staying in somebody else's home, and then we bring, you know, gifts or, you know, help in some way. And I think, you know, one of the core it's a beautiful gift to be invited. And then, you know, there's also kind of like this you know, respect and a delicacy to kind of understand, you know, hey, is it okay that I'm staying this long? So I'm genuinely curious about, you know, how do you work it out within yourself and being the welcome guest, and to be able to contribute in a way where people are like, yeah, the work that you're doing is so important, we'd love for you to stay longer.
Right. Well, you know, it wasn't like you know, years without leaving. Like there was definitely like short periods, weeks, months, and then I would leave. And then, you know, I had a lot of travels in those 7 years to Central and North America as well. But actually, plant medicine comes up in this because I think through all the different indigenous communities that I went to, I would say pretty much every single one, I was able to share some sort of ceremony. And that's what I ended up filming, were the ceremonies and the, you know, really intimate moments. And so it was as if like it wasn't like I was a weight, it was, I was contributing. You know, I would do my part, whether it would be, you know, sharing about my culture, where I come from. Sometimes I would teach, you know, yoga or some sort of, you know, meditation. And so it was always like a mutual exchange. It wasn't like I was just receiving from them, and then they got tired and like, okay, it's your time to leave now. So I think there's definitely like an importance of mutual exchange, where the community was also receiving something from my presence. And yeah, so I think that filmmaking and ceremony really kind of went hand in hand, because I was authentically doing the ceremony. It wasn't like, okay, let's get the lights set up. Can you, you know, go over there and then, you know, pick up the medicine bowl. It was always like very organic, which I think a lot of times in filmmaking, people don't have the time and luxury to do that. So they have like a specific agenda that they need, you know, these certain shots. And so there's actually a new emerging concept in film called cine comunitario, community cinema, which actually Jimmy is very involved in as well, which is a very different notion to filmmaking, where you're able to, you know, let the community members participate in the making of it. So yeah, that's something also interesting that's emerged from.
I'd love to hear more about cine comunitario. Can you tell me more about this concept? And Jimmy, I'd like to hear about how you are implementing this in your work as a filmmaker.
Yeah, and ella quiere conocer cómo has tenido esta experiencia de cine comunitario, en cambio de como una estructura de solo hacer tomas o grabar, como una, cómo haces cine más como para apoyar la comunidad.
Ya, cine comunitario nace con la necesidad de alzar voces de los abuelos, porque hay mucha injusticia que estaba pasando dentro de los territorios que desconoce, que el mundo de afuera desconoce.
Yeah.
Frente a esa necesidad nace el cine comunitario.
So he said the cine comunitario, or community cinema, is born from this need to tell the voices of the elders because of the destruction and the reality that's happening in the territory that Westerners are not aware of. And that's where this this emerged from.
So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah.
Desde esa necesidad, nosotros comenzamos a utilizar las cámaras. Las cámaras han sido una herramienta muy importante para los pueblos indígenas ahora en la actualidad, porque muchas veces nuestros pueblos, muchos pueblos indígenas, hemos sido objetos de violación de nuestros derechos a la naturaleza. Y también, frente a eso, el cine comunitario ha dado mucho revolución en las comunidades, diría, porque eso ayuda a que muchas personas vean la realidad, la necesidad de estos pueblos para poder enfrentar frente a muchas injusticias que existen en el territorio.
So basically what he's saying is that these cameras came forth as tools, almost as a resistance for the community because of what's going on, in the territories. A lot of it is environmental destruction. They came up to basically be able to tell the stories from their own perspective as a community. So that's when they started, filming together to tell these stories, because it's really important to get the message out into the world, especially with what's going on. I know with the plant medicine, with the territory, there's a lot of stories there. Actually, Jimmy was able to create a film about one of the basically during COVID, they were able to have 7 different plants that they were able to treat the the people in their community with. And so he was basically the voice and the filmmaker with the other members in the community together, telling the story of how they were able to use plant medicine to heal in their community. And they were able to get it out actually on the New York Times on a 10-minute video clip. So, it's really different from your traditional filmmaking, because it's coming from this really important need, as what I've heard from what Jimmy told me, that it's happening right now. Like there's a need for these stories to get out there. And so, yeah, it's really cool. And from my opinion, what's going on in their community, I was able to, visit and spend time with them and really see how they're using film as a means to tell their stories about their plants and their ceremonies, but also about the need to get help from the Western world because of the, really, really, in the moment destruction of what's happening. Actually, right now, they're trying to build a road through their community so that oil companies can pass to extract, oil legally. And also, massive amounts of palm oil is right on their border, and they're trying to manipulate the community members to cut down the Amazon in their territory to plant monoculture palm. And so that's another, reason why they've been able to pick up the camera, is so that they can tell the Western world, hey, like we're on the edge of destruction here. So it's really important what's going on.
You know what this reminds me of? I remember a long time ago when I was studying photography, and I had this this vision of being kind of like a documentary photographer, and was really a fan of Sebastião Salgado's work. And so in that period of time, I remember as I was exploring this world of documentation, there was a project where a photographer had given the children of prostitutes in the red light district in Calcutta photos, and then basically the whole exhibit were the photos that the children took of their lives as the children in this area. And the story that it told was really interesting, like from their perspective of what their life was. So is this kind of like a similar type of practice then, where like you distribute the tools for documentation among the community so that they tell their own story, and effectively what you get is a very different perspective than if you had typically what you'd have, like an outsider film crew that could come in and they've got their conception of what they think the people are and what they think is happening, which could be very divorced from how the subjects of that film actually feel about themselves. Is this like a similar type of initiative, so to speak?
I would say, yeah, it's similar in many ways. The only difference would be, so Jimmy has one of his close friends, Ribaldo, who is also a filmmaker. In opposed to like handing out cameras to a lot of people who may not have experience, basically there's like several youth who have been in training who are actually really good now. So now not only are they able to tell their own stories, but their skills in filmmaking are also very excellent. So but community cinema does also work in that sense, where you distribute cameras to people who maybe have never used a camera, and then they tell their own story. But what's interesting with Jimmy and in their community is that now they're able to not only tell their own stories, but develop, effective story skills as well, and filmmaking skills. So I think there's different variations, but it's that exact concept that you're talking about, allowing people to tell the story from their perspective in the community, opposed to, the outsider assuming what they think is going on. So yeah, very similar.
I'd love to hear about the work with the plant medicines and COVID, because I know that, for example, in Peru, there was an initiative called Comando Matico, where essentially, because of the pandemic and because they're indigenous communities that are, far away from cities and hospital, equipment and medical supply distribution lines, that they really had to take into their own hands their community health by going back to the plant medicines that the master plant healers and the elders were aware of, and drawing upon their own knowledge of their ethnobotanical pharmacopoeia, then come up with their own remedies. Did something like that happen in Ecuador?
Yeah. So, cuando llegó la pandemia, ¿cómo fue la reacción de la comunidad de enfrentar la pandemia? Porque está diciendo que muchas veces en las comunidades no tienen acceso a los hospitales o no quieren usar, digamos, el sistema de medicina occidental. ¿Cómo han usado los plantas ancestrales o los plantas maestros como Yahe para confrontar la enfermedad?
Bueno, primero para la nación Circo-Bain fue muy difícil porque lo primero que fue como nuestros abuelos fueron los que primero fallecieron. Después nos damos cuenta de que había sido el COVID que llegó a nuestro territorio justamente porque hay muchas vías de acceso que traen desde otros lugares que vienen a traer petróleo.
Yeah, so he's saying that for the Siakopai Nation, it was very difficult at the beginning because the people that were getting sick first were the elders and a lot of the, teachers and respected people in their community. And then, there's a lot of outsiders like the oil companies and palm oil and, foreign invaders that have come through the territory that, could have brought it.
Ya después de eso buscamos ayuda al Estado, al Ministerio de Salud Pública, pero no tuvimos respuestas.
And then after that, they were asking the Ministry of Health and the Ecuadorian government for help, but they didn't receive any answers.
Pero como no tuvimos respuesta, nos dimos cuenta de que nuestras propias medicinas nos podría salvar, porque
And then after we realized that they weren't going to help us or give us assistance, we realized that our own wisdom and our own plant medicines were going to be of greater assistance to, overcome the illness.
Nos damos cuenta porque nuestros ancestros siempre han resistido con plantas medicinales.
And our elders have actually always been able to overcome illness through medicinal plants.
Entonces comenzamos a utilizar muchas plantas que nuestros abuelos tienen en sus propias casas, también lo que hay en la selva. Entonces comenzamos a utilizar esas plantas. Nos dio buenos resultados al utilizarlas y desde ese momento hemos olvidado las medicinas occidentales.
And then they began to use, plants that they actually used a long time ago to confront other pandemics and illnesses that had come. And a lot of these plants they have around their house, or if not, they went into the jungle in search of them. And so they were, basically just using their medicinal plants, and it had very, very positive results into overcoming the illness. They were able to heal. From my experience, almost everybody that was sick was able to heal through the plant medicines.
Y así hemos resistido con plantas medicinales hasta ahora, y no, la comunidad no está ahora segura con plantas medicinales. Cualquier enfermedad o cualquier impacto que viene, la comunidad ya está muy consciente de la importancia que tiene nuestra sabiduría, nuestro conocimiento y nuestro territorio.
And so now they're sure that their plants are, the greatest ally in terms of, healing, and that they have this great wisdom. Moving forward, they're able to, just use these plant medicines to heal. So it was a very positive experience. Y como han tomado yaje también. ¿Cómo fue también la experiencia tomando yaje en ese tiempo?
Ha sido también, Yahé ha sido como, digamos, en la actualidad satanizado por la evangelización a nuestros abuelos.
So actually, now they have a plant, yahe, which many know as ayahuasca. It's the same root, but a different leaf. So it's similar to ayahuasca, but slightly different, called yahe. Actually, now in their community is being negatively looked upon because the evangelical church has come in and is telling them that it's a devilish practice. So many of the elders that have this wisdom are now almost being, beaten down.
A través de esa evangelización, lo que ha intentado al pueblo Sicubain es colonizarnos y desaparecernos, pero en la actualidad muchos jóvenes y muchos abuelos todavía resisten porque la sabiduría que trae la medicina sagrada es lo que nos mantiene vivos.
And so, although that reality is happening, where they're trying to colonize their way of being and almost remove this practice of using yahe as a force of resistance, many of the elders and now youth are actually still practicing yahe and maintaining like a strength to continue it, because that's what has allowed their community to survive and have the strength that it has until today.
So is there, so was there a period of cultural decline because of the pressure of colonization and evangelicism? And I know it's a hard one to produce, but like the evangelization and the colonialism that really exerted pressure on the indigenous communities with regards to their sovereignty, their culture, dignity, just all of those, all of that pressure. And, are you finding that now through the use of sacred plant medicines, there is a reinvigoration of the culture after the period of, a period of hardship?
Desde que llegó la colonización y esta influencia de la iglesia, desde ya hasta ahorita hay como una resistencia, una energía, un movimiento de seguir con yahe, las plantas medicinales, y también como un renacimiento de la cultura.
Sí, prácticamente las plantas y las plantas sagradas que tenemos han hecho el nuevo despertar de los jóvenes, nuevo despertar porque hemos desconectado de esa raíz de nuestra propia cultura, y eso nos ha tenido en problemas, en divisiones.
Pero so basically he's saying that the sacred plants are being almost like a reborn, or there's like a reawakening in the youth, in the young people in particular, because since the disconnection with the plants from the elders that had that generation of colonization, there was basically a disconnect from who they are, their essence, their community, and so now the youth are drinking yahe and returning to the plant medicines to return to their ancestral connection.
Y la medicina sagrada lo que nos ha hecho es fortalecer, nos ha hecho unir, nos ha hecho despertar, nos ha hecho que todavía seguimos vivos. La resistencia ha sido de las plantas medicinales y hoy estamos aquí con la misma fuerza y la energía de nuestros ancestros.
And so it's the sacred medicines that have allowed them to still continue today. And
que con la fuerza y la energía y el conocimiento de las plantas, nosotros seguimos todavía con la energía de nuestros ancestros en la actualidad.
Yeah. Okay, so the medicinal plants have actually allowed them to unify and strengthen and reconnect. So it's like the plant medicine is a force of resistance, a force of strength to reunify their culture, which has, really deeply connected to their ancestors. And that has actually allowed them to be alive today. So I think he's saying almost without these plant medicines, their community wouldn't be alive or here today.
I'm curious about the way in which they address the COVID pandemic. There's a lot of conversation in the plant medicine community, especially in the global north, about how, ayahuasca or yahe is a plant medicine that could potentially protect you from COVID. And at the same time, I'm also seeing other indigenous communities that are using different plants in order to strengthen their immune system or heal more quickly from COVID. So I'm curious to know what the perspective is among the Sekupai between, okay, if I'm worried about being sick from the coronavirus, or if I have it, which one would I take? Would I take these 7 plants, medicinal plants that were identified, or would I do the yahe, or would I do them both?
Sure, yeah. So está diciendo de la perspectiva del norte o la perspectiva occidental. Hay gente que piensa que el yahe puede curar la enfermedad, pero también otras comunidades indígenas en la Amazonía hay gente que están enfermando o utilizando otras plantas. ¿Cuál es el proceso? ¿Cómo se hace? ¿Puede tomar yahe para fortalecer y después tomar otras plantas, o primero tomar las plantas y después yahe? ¿Cómo es la relación, para clarificar para la gente?
Específicamente para curar COVID.
Para curar COVID.
Ya, nosotros lo que hemos utilizado primero son las plantas, ¿no? Las plantas específicas que pueden servir para el COVID, ¿no? Y hay otras plantas.
So first of all, to cure COVID, they're using other medicinal plants apart from yahe first to treat the illness.
Y más que todo, el yahe es para buscar esa conexión que nos lleve a concretar a otras plantas, porque...
So basically, drinking yahe, they get the wisdom to know which plants to use to cure the illness. So by drinking the yahe, the elders, the shamans get the information of where to go in the jungle, in which specific plants can treat which specific, symptoms.
So do they get the collective vision? Like they all got together, drank the yahe, we're like, okay, we know which plants to go get? Or could it be that different people drink the yahe and get a different recipe for the remedy? Was it a collective vision, or is it kind of like, individually, they're like, oh yes, we should all, seek out these same plants?
Todos toman juntos y tienen la misma como información cuál plantas, o es como individual, hay una persona que toma, otra persona toma por ahí y cada persona tiene como su información diferente?
Sí, yo creo que es lo más profundo, es una información diferente. No puede ser, por más que tomen grupo, no pueden tener el mismo visión o misma cosa, porque no es así.
And so it's not like they all drink together and they all get the same information. It's more individual. So even though they can drink together, each person is going to actually get, different information about different plants. So it's more individualized.
Mm-hmm. And how did they come up with the collective recipe?
And cómo han llegado a esta receta de las 7 plantas?
De las 7 plantas, la receta es que nuestros ancestros han sufrido una serie de enfermedades a lo largo de la historia. Desde esas memorias, desde ese conocimiento, desde esas plantas que utilizaron anteriormente, en la actualidad, lo que la pandemia nos hizo es volver a reconectarnos y volver a recordar qué plantas fueron utilizados anteriormente con otras enfermedades. Eso nos ha ayudado en la actualidad a despertar y volver a utilizar las mismas plantas y otras diferentes plantas, recolectándose de otro espacio y preparando y luego compartiendo con otras nacionalidades también dentro del pueblo. Y eso nos ha ayudado a fortalecer, y eso nos ha salvado varias vidas aquí durante esta pandemia.
So the drinking of yahe, it's like a remembrance or reawakening as well to their history, because they have in the past also had, with the invasion of Westerners, even 500 to 500 years ago, with the rubber tappers and different people coming in. They had different illnesses that they brought to their community for the first time, and so that they used certain plants, during that time period to treat certain symptoms. So when they were able to drink the medicine, or just talking with different elders, they remembered, oh, hey, we have this plant to treat this symptom, maybe the sore throat, or we have this plant to treat the fever, or we have this. So they started remembering from the past different illnesses that had similar symptoms to COVID, but then kind of bringing it all together from different people and different sources. Okay, we actually have all these plants that we were able to use in the past to cure different symptoms. And then they came up with this remedy. And then he's saying that they were actually really successful in curing the people in their community, that they began to make more medicine, and they started sharing it with other indigenous nationalities that began to ask them for assistance because it was so successful. And so then they began to, open-heartedly share with the, people around them that were also getting sick.
What's in the recipe? I'm curious. I wonder how it compares to the Comando Matico recipe.
¿Cuáles son las plantas o cuál es la receta? Si quieres compartir, puede ser un Piaguaje o no sé si tiene nombre en español.
A ver, creo que solo tenemos en Paincoca. Bueno, hay una que es quinina, lo conocen generalmente.
One is quinina, which people know in general. Quinina.
Like a quinine? It's what they use to treat malaria. Is that?
También puede ayudar malaria.
Sí, malaria.
También, yeah, also can cure malaria. Treat.
Eso fue utilizada con mis ancestros anteriormente cuando tenían gripe, porque el gripe fue la que casi eliminó el 90% de la población Piaguaje.
So there was like a flu that came in, and that canina is the plant that they used to treat that actually, before they used it, killed off almost 90% of their population.
Mm-hmm.
Y también Sensebusque es ajo del monte, que son más conocidos, pero hay otras plantas en Paincoca.
So one is ojo de monte. It's like a garlic leaf. I'm not sure in English how you'd say it, but
garlic?
it's a leaf that actually smells really heavy like garlic, but it's just a green leaf, which other nationalities in Ecuador I know have used. But the other ones, which they only have a name in their traditional language, Paikoka, they don't have a Spanish word for. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. We're trying to reverse engineer the herbal remedy for COVID. So in another conversation we had with a leader of the Shipibo community, he shared the recipe for the Comando Matico formula, and it was something like Matico, forest ginger, garlic, with orange juice and milk.
Oh my gosh.
It was a bit like it sounded like a bit of a garlicky orange Julius. It worked really well for them. So yeah.
Well, when I was there in the community, they were making the brew, and a lot of the plants that are in their language that don't have a Spanish name were almost similar to ayahuasca, like a vine, like a bark, like a tree bark. There was a lot of tree bark in the mix, I remember. So like peeling of trees. And one of them, they actually had to go to their ancestral territory, which is on the border of Peru and Ecuador, like a whole day's trip on canoe to find this one specific tree bark that's kind of almost going extinct. I don't think there's a whole lot of it left, which is really cool, because actually one of Jimmy and their community's visions is to create a healing center for education, but also for, almost like research or kind of like a rejuvenation of these plant medicines, because a lot of them are disappearing. And so they want to reforest and replant these medicinal plants so that they can use them for, whatever other illnesses come up. So it's really cool actually how in this situation with COVID, they were actually able to transform poison into medicine. Like I feel it in some way strengthened their community unity because they were able to remember, oh my gosh, we have all of this wisdom that we just forgot about. It's just in our backyard in the jungle, So it's cool how you're able to create positivity in some sense from whatever's going on.
Mm-hmm. Does Jimmy see more and more of the Siakupai youth going back to their ancestral ways or reclaiming it in a new way?
¿Tú ves otros jóvenes Siakupai que también quieren reconocer este conocimiento?
Sí, estamos trabajando en la comunidad con grupos de jóvenes que hemos dado cuenta lo importante que es la sabiduría ancestral y entonces estamos trabajando, construyendo casas de pensamiento donde nosotros vamos a compartir la medicina con los abuelos, donde se va a tomar decisiones importantes para el futuro del pueblo, no solo como personas, sino también definir el futuro del pueblo, hacia dónde queremos llegar como psicopaíns, si vamos a seguir perdurando en la actualidad o vamos a desaparecer. Por eso es importante las casas de pensamiento y por eso hemos reunido con jóvenes con esta visión de seguir recuperar lo nuestro y trabajar con los abuelos, con los últimos guardianes que existen en la actualidad.
So he's saying, yes, the youth have actually gathered together and have this proposal to connect with the elders to continue this wisdom because they're thinking, how are we going to continue as a nationality in the future, with what's going on? And so they've unified and they are creating, in Spanish, it's called Casa de Pensamiento, which in English would translate into house of thought. It's almost like a medicine house or like a maloca. Some people know the word maloca, where you can gather to do ceremony, but also not just ceremony, but dialogue and have new ideas come forth. So they're in this process of creating this Casa de Pensamiento where the youth and the elders can drink medicine and dialogue about, what's the future of their nationality.
So in the filmmaking that you do, and maybe, like for both of you, what do you think are the most important themes or concerns that you're trying to communicate through your filmmaking, especially as it relates to Indigenous issues or in
Sure.
topics of Indigenous importance?
En el tema de tus grabaciones, tus películas, ¿cuáles son los temas más importantes que quieres comunicar hoy en día?
Yo creo que, bueno, como nación, como pueblo indígena, nuestras historias, nuestro conocimiento ha sido transferido oralmente hasta en la actualidad.
So in our community, a lot of our wisdom has been transmitted orally up until today.
Pero esa tradición en la actualidad se está perdiendo.
But actually this tradition is now being lost, the oral tradition.
Y lo que hacemos es a través de cine comunitario, de los videos, de recolectar, hacer entrevistas con los abuelos que nos cuenten sobre tal planta medicinal, sobre las historias de los abuelos, para tener que de esos archivos nuestros hijos, la futura generación pueda ver y conocer que había tanto conocimiento que no se ha perdido, sino que se ha quedado ya en videos archivados y que pueda servir para el futuro.
And so with the video and the filmmaking, what they're trying to do in the community cinema is record their elders, especially, and their stories, their oral history about plant medicines, about their culture, about their cosmovision. And so, all of these oral traditions, oral stories that have normally been passed on that way can now be recorded in video as archives for the future children and the generations that are coming that won't have that opportunity to hear their oral history of their elders. At least they'll be able to have it on video. So that's the main focus for them right now. And then from my perspective, for, being an outsider. I'm Japanese American, so coming into the Indigenous communities and filming, especially in this work of 7 years, The Roots Awaken, is really to show the entire world, like, we're at this tipping point, we're at this crucial moment. A lot of us know it. The environmental destruction to the water, to the air, to the earth, it can't continue. Otherwise, we're going to basically destroy ourselves as humanity. And so a lot of people are lost, like what to do or what's going on. And I want to remind people about the sanctity of life, like how sacred life really is and how we are interconnected. And then in terms of planet Earth, I feel that the Amazon rainforest is one of the most important places that we can protect, because it is at this tipping point of deforestation. I mean, if you've seen what we've seen, you wouldn't believe it. And so my message to the world is that the way to protect the Amazon rainforest is to protect and empower the Indigenous people that have lived there and still live there, and to listen to their needs and what they say, opposed to assuming what we think needs to be done or doing scientific studies about the Amazon rainforest. It's actually quite simple. It's making friendship, becoming friends with the Indigenous people, letting them, invite you to their home, drink some medicine or whatever it takes. And then like, okay, what's really going on? What are your needs? And so that's my message with, The Roots Awaken in filmmaking, is like, let's listen to the Indigenous people now. And also let's remember that we're all sacred and that all life is sacred. And now we're at this time of this grand unification of, many, many different ancestral wisdoms coming to the forefront. So that's what I would say for my message as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that message. It's a really powerful message. A lot of people that are coming to this event and going to be, who are going to be hearing these sessions, there's a globalization of plant medicines happening. And, many people who are getting connected to plant medicines, that are receiving the plant medicines like ayahuasca, wachuma, many, iboga from people who are holding ceremonies who are not Indigenous, and those people might have spent some time with the Indigenous to learn their ways, or maybe not. And sometimes the medicine's not necessarily coming from the Amazon, or it's or Mexico, or it might be grown elsewhere, right? So there's kind of like an internationalization of many medicine traditions that were ancestral and specifically from a culture. So I'm curious to know from your perspective, for those folks that don't really have such a close relationship to Indigenous medicine wisdom lineages, how can they be better allies to the Indigenous movement for sovereignty? And, should they even? I mean, I think, some of the perspectives I'm getting is, well, hey, my ayahuasca comes from Hawaii. It's a ceremony that's neo-shamanic. There's nothing Indigenous at all. The medicine's for everybody. I don't really feel like I need to exert myself to do anything for people so far away. And I'm an inquiry myself. I mean, I have relationships with Indigenous people in Brazil. So there's that, but a lot of people don't. So, curious to know.
Great. I think that's a really great question. And I think it's one of actually the most important questions that needs to be asked in this uprising of medicinal plants in our global community. And I think it needs to be asked more. I think a lot of people do have that perspective, and I think it's ignorance. It's just they never had that experience, and it's not their fault. I wouldn't, even make anyone feel bad if they've never had an experience, with Indigenous people, especially those who are just like looking for healing, like they genuinely want healing, and they just don't have that background. But I think the answer to that is definitely education, because if you want to get the full spectrum of healing or effect of a plant medicine, I can say 100% that connecting with Indigenous lineage that is sincere and authentic. And of course, there's like, a lot of, false shamans or other things like that. But like connecting to a really authentic lineage is important, because there's certain vibrational songs that go with the medicines that actually activate the force that without them are not so potent. I know a lot of people nowadays are interested in like bufo frog, which it's like it's like this frog from northern Mexico that you smoke to get like a 10-minute DMT experience. And they say that, there's no lineage connected to that, but there is, and it's really related to the Mayans. And there's a specific song that when you sing it, it actually activates the intention or the energy behind that frog. But people are doing the medicine without the song. It's similar with ayahuasca. I mean, there's like these Icaros or like Spanish songs where you're singing, like Pachamama, which are great, but actually there's like certain vibrational songs that have passed on for almost like, I would say even more than maybe 10,000 or 100,000 years, that only these specific elders in these communities have, because they've had this oral tradition of passing it on to their children and so forth. So it's actually like respecting the indigenous people and that they have been carrying this for hundreds of thousands of years. It's like, it's a respect. I know in America, a lot of us are like, oh, we're all equal. It doesn't really matter. But it's because America is kind of this like fusion of many different cultures. But I think if we don't respect and listen to the indigenous people, we're going to lose, I would say like 80% of the benefits that we can get from plant medicine. So for those who don't know, I would say number one, like just educate yourself, like watch some documentaries, where they're honoring indigenous voices, or like read literature or books, or talk with friends who have indigenous friends, and just get like familiar from that perspective. And then, but yeah, I think it's okay not to have a relationship with indigenous people, but I think for sure, if you're going to get involved with plants, especially like ayahuasca, there has to be a respect. And just knowing that the rainforest is like being clear-cutted, like what's going to happen when these indigenous people and these plant medicines aren't there? Like, are you just going to order it on Amazon? Like, there has to be some reciprocity. There has to be some relationship, because that's what the healing and the plant medicine comes from. It comes from the relationship. The elders and the Amazon, they're actually calling these celestial beings down, that they're like their great grandparents like come into the ceremony. So it's like, I'm blown away because I haven't seen that in my experience, but listening to Jimmy and all his ancestors come, into the room, and it's like, there's something important about that. So this question I get really passionate about, and I don't know, if there's just a clear one-cut answer, but I think the first thing is just like respect and educate yourself, and perhaps, even visit someone that's indigenous or get familiar with that. I don't know if Jimmy has something to say about it, but let me ask him.
I'd love to ask
La gente occidental que quiere usar como yaje o cualquier planta medicinal y dice, pero yo no necesito tener ninguna relación con los pueblos indígenas, o no tiene nada que ver porque las plantas son para todos. ¿Qué dices tú como a la gente que tiene esta perspectiva?
Pues yo creo que es como las plantas medicinales siempre han sido los guardianes de los pueblos indígenas.
So the indigenous people have always been the guardians of specific medicinal plants such as yaje.
Y cuando la medicina se la usa sin permiso, cosas malas pasan. Y he visto muchas experiencias de otros supuestamente centros de sanaciones que utilizan yaje o ayahuasca en otros países y sus clientes se mueren porque por falta de espíritu y falta de respeto hacia las plantas, siempre negativo puede pasar. Y eso es lo que pasa en algunos lugares también.
So because the indigenous people have been guardians, they've have a great respect, and the people from the outside, sometimes they don't have that respect and they don't actually ask permission, and negative things happen. And so he's seen also there's some centers where they don't have that respect or permission from indigenous people or the plants themselves, and then people actually die or get sick, or some really negative things can happen. So it's almost out of like the protection for the people that they have that respect there to the plant. I think it's to the plant itself, but the indigenous people understand how to respect the plant. Yeah.
Y es muy peligroso, especialmente el yaje, que es muy sagrado para nosotros, Y es muy peligroso que le falten un respeto peor a los abuelos.
Yeah, it can be really dangerous when there is that disrespect to the plant, and especially when there's a disrespect to the elders, the indigenous shaman elders. Mm-hmm.
Y entonces es lamentable decirles que la medicina sagrada es muy, yo digo y he visto, es muy peligroso tomar viajes sin su propio guía, sin su propio chamán que les guía, porque siempre necesita un guía para que pueda curar y sanarse a sí mismo.
Yeah, and so it's really important that there's a guide that really understands the relationship with the plant. And so that's something that the indigenous people have been doing for so long, is being guides. And so it's really important to have that guide. When he's speaking in terms of Yahe in their community, because it's really sacred, the Yahe.
And how can we in the global north be better allies to the indigenous people and the indigenous movement?
Y cómo la gente del norte y mundo occidental ser mejor como alianza a los pueblos indígenas.
Yo creo que lo más importante aquí, los abuelos que todavía viven y que llevan ese conocimiento, son ellos los que deberían compartir la medicina con otros pueblos, porque en la actualidad es lo que estamos buscando, es la unión de los pueblos, y la única esperanza que yo lo veo es a través de la medicina.
So he's saying that to be better allies, the people in the north can actually make friendship and support the last living elders, shamans that are still here. And he says that really he feels the solution is drinking medicine with those elders and creating, a union. So it's like, I guess,
come down
instead of creating a closer, like eliminating the gap between the north and the indigenous, and to do that, actually sharing medicine with one another is a great way to be allies, like supporting those elders in the medicine way is what he's saying.
To start by coming down to Ecuador and visiting and sharing a cup of ayahuasca in ceremony.
Yeah, that's what he's saying. I mean, I think it's, for those who have that capacity, or even from a distance, like when there's opportunities where those elders are making, a call for assistance, like to come in and support, maybe financially, with their projects or with products. Like, I think, in my opinion, what I've seen more than ever is like the need for new economics for indigenous people, because one of the major reasons of loss of medicinal plants and wisdom is because that they've never had money before, and now that money has come into the communities and the deforestation exists, they can't like fish the way they used to and have the same amount of food. So now they actually need to go to the store and buy, oil supplies, because we're in this modern world. So what's happening is they're destroying it's like they don't have the education. So they're like cutting down the trees to sell, just to like, have their child go to school, or to be able to have the basic necessities that we have as human beings that they have the right to. And so I would say, like, from my opinion, what can Westerners do is to support a new economic model for indigenous people. That's, I think, something that's coming forward as we speak now. Like for them, they want to create the center for medicinal plants, actually be able to reforest medicinal plants. Perhaps that could be a new economics for them. Instead of cutting down the trees, they can actually, be able to make income through medicinal plants or something, teas, herbal teas. It could be tinctures, like shampoos from the Amazon. So I think, from my opinion, that's something that's really important, is like, how can we as Westerners help indigenous people continue to live in their territory without destroying it, and empower them so that they can still have cell phones and solar panels and be a part of the Western world. Let's just be aware. I would invite people, like, when these opportunities come up, to support indigenous people in this new economics that's emerging.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your stories, your work, some, really important things that we need to think about in terms of how we can be more effective partners and allies, because at the end of the day, what's really at stake is the planet. And we have to learn how to work together. And if we want to not destroy the planet, we need to make sure that the people who are living the last wilderness areas on Earth are thriving and healthy and empowered. So, thank you for the work that you're doing. Really grateful for the time. How can the audience best stay in touch with you?
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you to everyone who's been able to listen in. I am on www.therootsawaken.com. My name is Kumiko Hayashi on social media, and
we'll put that down below the video.
Sure. ¿Cómo puede encontrar la gente si quieren buscarte tu nombre, Instagram o página web?
¿Tienes su página web?
No tengo.
GoFundMe
Sí, nosotros como jóvenes de la comunidad estamos organizando y creando una ONG y estamos haciendo campaña para recolectar fondos para poder levantar nuestra ONG y seguir trabajando en la conservación de nuestro territorio, trabajando con videos en la recuperación de la memoria orales. Y entonces, ya le paso los links para que pueda revisar sobre el trabajo, lo que estamos haciendo. Y bueno, solo tengo correo, me pueden contactar con jimmypiaguaje@gmail.com si tiene alguna pregunta o consulta sobre el trabajo que estamos haciendo.
So he just said his email, like if you need to contact him, that's the way to contact him. And then the link that we'd like to share that he's talking about is actually a GoFundMe page for their community. There's a group of youth, particular young people that are creating their own NGO, like a Siakopai Indigenous Nation NGO, so that they can continue to protect the territory, do community cinema, and all of these new projects that they're talking about. They're in the process of establishing this NGO. And so if anybody would like to support that, we can pass that link to support the Indigenous youth NGO that's happening with the Siakopai Nation.
Fantastic. I'll put that link down below this video as well. All right. Thank you so much again. Really grateful for your time. I hope to visit you in Ecuador.
You're always welcome. You're welcome to come sit with the elders and drink a cup of yahe. So
I would love that.
Anytime.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.